Hey everybody, it's Aaron Asay, the Executive Director of Jase Response. I'm here with Jase Medical with your weekly threat brief for today, Friday, May 29th. It's been a busy week, and this one started with Memorial Day. It was a solemn occasion. We were able to spend it together as a family and go to the cemetery and pay our respects to those who have fought and died for our freedoms. Next week, the week ends with the commemoration of the 82nd anniversary of D-Day. So please keep that on your calendar, and we will be in Normandy celebrating and watching some of our family members participate. One of them, my daughter, will be jumping out of an airplane just like the paratroopers on June 6, 1944, to commemorate all the women who were involved in the D-Day invasion. All right, so for today, we are going to talk about Iran briefly because it's been going on and not much has changed. We've got active ceasefire negotiations, but the main risk is still in effect. We've got higher fuel prices, we've got inflation pressure, we've got cyber retaliation, and we always have the ever-present terrorism threat from not just the group actors, but also lone wolf actors and homegrown extremists here in the United States. We're also going to talk briefly about the El Nino, which is a storm pattern system or a weather system that creates storm patterns that can really influence or affect the risks and threats to coastal communities and sometimes even inland communities. So we're expected to have a stronger than normal El Nino season. What that means is your Atlantic hurricanes are probably going to be a little bit more mild, a little bit more mellow. However, that can shift the hurricane and storm risk to the Pacific. And so our West Coast, as well as our communities in Hawaii, the islands in the Pacific, and even the West Coast as far down as Mexico, could experience some pretty drastic weather this particular hurricane season, which is just about to begin. I want to mention just a quick story. So 1983, that winter, was the worst El Nino season on record. And I just happened to be living in Southern California. And my father, I was a young boy at that time, and my father decided that it would be a great time to go out to Catalina Island on our little 27-foot sailboat. And while we were out there, one of the storms of the century, appeared and kept us from getting home by damaging our sailboat midway between the channel of Catalina Island and Marina del Rey. It also wiped out the famous Santa Monica Pier and tore away the front half of it that is out in the ocean, which included, if any of you remember California during that time, it had a roller coaster on it. And that was a really sad time, but it also wreaked havoc and is known as one of the worst storms of the last 50 years in California, one of the worst on record, caused by a severe El Nino winter. The last thing I want to talk about this week is the Ebola outbreak in Congo and Uganda. Now, Ebola is a hemorrhagic fever. It's a virus. It is related similarly to hantavirus, and we've been talking about hantavirus recently. I want to talk about Ebola just because this appears to be one of the worser outbreaks that Africa has seen. And having it in Congo and Uganda is not so out of the ordinary because that's where previous outbreaks have been. However, it appears to be larger than it has been in the past. Ebola is always there, but it appears to be expanding slightly. And does that cause an increased risk to citizens in the United States? Not necessarily, but if you're traveling to Africa, especially to Congo or Uganda, airports are already screening. For example, JFK is screening for flights coming from certain parts of Africa. If you're traveling to any part of Africa and you could be potentially exposed to somebody who's been in the Congo or Uganda or neighboring communities that might have traveled through there, if they're showing signs and symptoms of being sick, so that would be cough, fever, sweating, just looking ill, you need to consider isolation, so your hygiene, personal protective equipment, and that would be a well-fitting N95 mask, hand sanitizer, potentially gloves if you have to be in contact with that person in any sort of intimate type of setting. But consider, if you're just sitting on an airplane with that person, that you might want to, in one of these cases, consider wearing a mask on the plane. So this week's preparedness tip is going to be continue watching your situational awareness, what's going on around you, being aware of what's happening in your community. But I also want you to think about, as we get into the travel season, what are the risks associated with the places that you're going to? Think about that pre-travel risk assessment and take those things with you that you might consider necessary, that you might need. So it could be having a first aid kit, having some extra medications in case you get trapped there, making sure you know the way home, having over-the-counter and prescription medications, as well as your chronic medications if you happen to need those, having at least a 30-day supply in case you get trapped and can't get back home. I'll be showing some tips shortly on how to prepare a first aid kit for travel, the types of things that you might want to carry. So check back with us for those and stay tuned, and we'll see you next week.